أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين آمين والحمد لله رب العالمين أما بعد. Today, alhamdulillah, since we have finished the subject of fasting, Saum, we are going to go on to Kitab al-Zakat, which is the book on giving your zakat, which is the yearly obligatory charity that one must give. So if we're going to have a quick look at the contents, we can see that we're going to talk about what you need to pay zakat on, debt, and conditions for zakat to be obligatory upon somebody. Obviously, zakat, when we're talking about zakat, we're always going to be talking about gold and silver, and who are able to receive zakat, who's eligible, who is not eligible, so ineligible. The sadaqatul fitr, which is the sadaqah given at the end of Ramadan. We talk about this within the book of zakat. Why? Because it is also a charity which you must give. So if you're going to talk about it in a subject, it's the best subject to talk about it will be in either zakat or at the end of Saum. But usually it's within zakat. Quantity of the sadaqatul fitr payment when sadaqatul fitr becomes mandatory. And then we're going to talk about udhiyah, which is the ritual sacrifice, inshallah, which we will be doing on in about 10 days. So when talking about the ritual sacrifice, we are going to look at what sort of animal is allowed and isn't allowed, and also what illnesses the animal shouldn't have, or any disabilities the animal shouldn't have. And unfortunately, in the UK and in a lot of other places, they cut off the tail of the sheep. So sheep actually have tails. In the UK, we might not be used to seeing that because they always cut them off. And our ulama have said that this will make an animal ineligible for qurban, for sacrifice. So that's why a lot of places do their sacrifices elsewhere. Obviously, is it possible to find sheep with intact tails in the UK? It is possible, but it's quite difficult. Now, introduction. Zakat is the transfer of ownership. Important. So it's not lending money, it's not borrowing money, it is the transfer of ownership. It is no longer yours once you give it. For the sake of Allah, of a portion of wealth determined by the lawgiver, okay, which is Allah. And depending on the context, we sometimes call the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam the lawgiver. 2.5% if it is above the zakat threshold, what we call the nisab, and has been owned for a lunar year. So you pay zakat once a year, but remember this is a lunar year. So it's about more or less 10 days less than a normal year. And therefore, when you become, the day you become wealthy, you need to jot down the date in Hijri. So you need to figure out if it's Muharram, Safar, Rabiul Awwal, whatever, and jot down that date, because whenever that date comes around is when you have to pay your zakat. So that's important, the lunar year. There is a zakat threshold. Poor people don't have to give zakat, rich people do. There is a threshold. And also it's only 2.5%, which is a lot less. If you were to read this as a tax, which it is not a tax, because a tax would go to the government. This zakat isn't a tax. This zakat, 2.5%, goes to poor people. It's got nothing to do with a tax. Okay, so it's an obligatory charity. It is not paid to one's parents or their progenitors, nor to one's children or their descendants. So you cannot go up and you cannot go down. Up as in your father, their father, their father, or your mother, their mother, their mother, or your mother's father, so on and so forth. Neither can you go down as in your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. You can't go up and you can't go down. Okay? Similarly, it is not paid to one's wife. You cannot pay zakat to your wife, and she does not pay it to her husband, and vice versa. Not allowed. The conditions for the obligation of zakat are: 1, sanity. If you've noticed, we don't ask insane people to do anything. 2, adulthood. So in the Hanafi madhab, a child does not give zakat even if they're rich. Okay, which can happen when if the child's father or somebody else passes away and they inherit a bunch of money, then they can be a 7-year-old which is rich according to Islam. Number 3, being Muslim. We don't ask non-Muslims to pay zakat. This is something we only ask Muslims to do. Number 4, being a free person. Slaves don't have to pay zakat even if they are somehow rich. And number 5, knowledge that zakat is an obligation, even if it is something that takes the ruling of knowledge, like being in Muslim lands. So knowledge means that somebody who's just become Muslim and he doesn't have any knowledge of Islam, we won't punish them for not paying zakat. But anyone who lives in Muslim lands, they have no excuse not to know. So even if they don't know, when we say punish, we just say that you haven't paid your zakat, you need to pay it. Now, the legal reason, sabab, for the obligatoriness of zakat. So what needs to happen for zakat to become fard upon you? Okay, so remember the sabab is what needs to happen for it to become fard upon you. Is complete ownership for a lunar year of an amount above the zakat threshold. Okay, so complete ownership, it can't be money that you've borrowed. That's not complete ownership. It can't be something you've borrowed. If you've borrowed gold to wear, you don't pay zakat on that gold. That's not yours. It's not complete ownership. For a lunar year, okay, remember Muharram, Safar, Rabiul Awwal, these lunar years, of an amount above the zakat threshold. Okay, so if you're past a certain threshold, then we say you are wealthy and you have to pay zakat. That is, okay, and there are conditions now. Free from debt. Okay, so let's say now the zakat threshold is more or less 80 grams of gold. Now, let's say you have 90 grams of gold, but 30 grams of that gold is actually, you owe it as debt. So even though you own, it's yours, that 90 grams of gold, you didn't borrow it, you own 90 grams of gold. However, you owe somebody else money. Because of this, whatever you owe, we have to subtract. And after we've subtracted all of that debt, if you still have the nisab, if you still have that threshold, then you have to pay. So it has to be free from debt where the creditor is a person, regardless of whether it is payable for the sake of Allah. The creditor is a person means what? That means you don't owe it to Allah. So we don't count past non-zakat payments, which you have to pay. We don't count that as debt. So you don't take that off the top. Also, if you've got a kafara where you need to feed 10 people, because this money is owed to Allah, not to a creditor, we don't count that as debt. So regardless of whether it is payable for the sake of Allah, zakat, land tax, or for the sake of individuals, even if it is acting as a guarantor for a payment. Okay, so it doesn't matter, as long as it's free from debt, we count it in the nisab. If it's not free from debt, and the creditor is a normal human being, so we're talking about normal debts here, then we take that off from your wealth, and then we check if it's still nisab or not. The debt may be a deferred payment, even if it is a deferred marriage payment, which is the mahr to his wife. Okay, so a man might have accepted, let's just say 10,000, but he says he's going to pay it off in 10 years. So every year he's going to give 1,000, and if the wife accepts this, we call this a deferred payment. Or he says he'll pay 10,000, but he'll pay it after 5 years have passed. So this is a deferred payment. So he owes her how much? 10,000. So this is a debt because it's owed to a person, which is his wife. Or fixed maintenance payments that are either incumbent upon him due to court ruling or are voluntary. In contrast, debt as a result of a vow or expiation or the obligation of Hajj, all of them are liable to zakat because these are owed to who? These are owed to Allah. But these other things are owed to people. Now, what does it mean by a voluntary maintenance payment? That means there is a voluntary agreement between the husband and the wife. So the husband has said to his wife, and the wife has agreed that he's going to pay her X amount of money every single month. And she's agreed to this. So this is her maintenance payment. We count this as a debt. So that month's payment, not a whole year's payment of it, but that month's payment. So let's say he's just finished his 1 lunar year, but he hasn't paid her the maintenance for this month. So we'll count that as the debt. And number 2, so this money, it has to be in excess of the necessaries of life. So what are the necessaries of life? So we're talking about anything he doesn't need. So it's savings, basically. I like to call them savings. So we only ask zakat of the savings of a person. We don't ask the person to give us money that they've put aside for food. We don't ask them for zakat on the money that they need to pay their rent with, and so on and so forth, for that month, not for a whole year. Okay, so the necessaries of life are what avert destruction from a person and include basic living costs. Okay, one's place of primary residence. So you don't have to pay zakat on your house. You don't need to get your house evaluated every year and pay zakat of it. You'd go broke very quickly. Clothes, debt, equipment used in one's profession. Okay, so if you're a joiner, you don't pay zakat on your tools. If you're a builder, you don't pay zakat on your building tools. But however, if you're somebody like me who does DIY, then you do pay zakat on your tools. Household furniture, you don't pay zakat on household furniture. You don't pay zakat on your riding animals, i.e. your car. And by implication, modern day modes of transport. On the final day of the lunar zakat year, any amounts payable in respect of the necessaries of life that are the costs incurred in the year that has finished. Okay, so on the final day of the lunar zakat year, so it's your day of zakat tomorrow, yeah? Any amount payable in respect of the necessaries of life that are the costs incurred in the year that has finished. So as long as you owe that money from either that day or the day before, and any day before that, as long as you owe it within that year, we don't count that either. But if it's owed the day after, then we don't count that from this year. So you do have to pay zakat on it. For example, utility bills that are paid in arrears. Okay, so if you're paying it in advance, then we don't count that as a debt. It can't be counted as a debt because you don't owe that money. You're just paying it in advance. But if you're paying it in arrears, how like most people are, when you first start your, when you first move into the house, you don't pay anything for the first year. For the first month. Towards the end of the month, you get your first bill. So after you've used up all the electricity is when you get your first bill. However, if you're paying on a top-up meter, for example, so you're paying in advance, we don't count that if it's past that day of the year. Again, don't forget you can always ask questions in the chat if if anything doesn't make sense. Or payments one must make after the year has finished, but have already become due. Okay, so the payment is after the year has finished. So it's tomorrow, but the payment has already become due. For example, next year's car insurance and next month's rent paid in advance. These are valid debt, okay, that may be deducted when calculating one's zakat liability for the year. Okay, so even though you're paying for next year's car insurance, you have to pay it today. Okay, because you have to pay it today, you can include it in today's zakat. Similarly, debts arising from transactions not associated with one's necessaries of life may be deducted when calculating one's zakat liability. So debts are taken off your liability always. It doesn't matter if it was because you wanted, because of necessaries of life, or if it was just luxury. You borrowed money to go on a holiday, for example. That borrowed money is a debt. It's a valid debt, and we do take that off of zakat. So all of these, it's explaining in excess of the necessaries of life. So if you think about it, what do we actually have to pay zakat on? We don't pay it on our food, electricity, gas bills, our rent. We deduct that. Our debt, we deduct everything. We keep deducting all these things. What we're left with is basically what I said in the beginning, our savings. It's just sitting there. It's not doing anything. We don't need it to live. So it's in excess of what we need to live. So after all your bills are paid, whatever's left, basically, and you've put aside. And number 3 has the propensity to increase. So this is important because, for example, somebody might have 3 or 4 cars, which they don't have an intention to sell. Okay? They don't have an intention to sell the cars. They just bought them because they want 3 or 4 cars. Now, the wealth we're talking about, the wealth which is zakat is paid upon, has the propensity to increase. Okay, which means money makes money, right? You need money to make money, is how the saying goes. But a car doesn't make you money. But money does make you money by you invest it, you start a business and whatnot, you buy things and you sell things for a higher price, even if it is by implication. Okay, so either you have gold and silver and fiat money. This always has the propensity to increase. We don't look at why you got the money, how you got the money. This is money. And the second one is, even if by implication means, for example, you bought a car, but you have the intention to sell it. So normally a car doesn't increase your wealth, right? But if you have the intention of selling it, then it does increase your wealth. So that's why if the intention here is important. Also, for example, you might have a bag of rice, for example. And obviously a bag of rice, there's no zakat on it. It doesn't increase your wealth. However, if when you're dealing with somebody, you're like, yeah, I've got a bag of rice at home, I can trade you that for this. So you've implied that you're planning to trade with it. That could also be part of zakat. So that's what it means by even if it's by implication. So if we read, so in sacred law, increase may be literal, right? By procreation or by implication. There is potential for the wealth in the hand of the owner or his deputy to be used for profitable trade. Now, based on the above, so these three conditions which we just read, based on those, so we've got a quick question here. When you deduct bills, do you deduct it from an annual perspective or do you deduct it from the last month of your zakat to date? Normally, we don't deduct things annually. So what you would do, let's say I owe my zakat tomorrow, right? So today's my last day. Today is basically the day I start calculating everything. And any bills that I have to pay now, I also deduct those. But for only a month. I don't take out a whole year's of rent from my zakat. Otherwise, nobody would pay zakat, basically. Only very rich people would pay zakat that way. If I were to take away a whole year's of rent from my wealth, I wouldn't be able to pay zakat. So we don't take it annually. We only take it whatever I have to pay now. If I have to pay rent now, I'm not talking about tomorrow. I might have to pay it tomorrow. If I have to pay it tomorrow, I don't take it away from today. But if it's due today, so the direct debit needs to come out either today or it came out yesterday or whatever, or it was supposed to come out yesterday, but something happened and it didn't come out, so I owe it, then that is calculated as debt. But next month has nothing to do, or tomorrow has nothing to do with this year. So tomorrow, that would be, it's got nothing to do with your payment, which is due at the end of today. So inshallah, I understood your question right. Based on the above, no zakat is due on the following things. So these three conditions, according to them, 1, pawn after the pawnee has taken possession of it. So pawning an item means you give it for money. So usually you'll have an antique thing in your house, or you'll have something in your house. You give it to the person and you take money from it. So that's no longer in your possession, right? That person's taken it. Regardless of whether it is money or grazing livestock or whatever. Whatever you've given to somebody in exchange for something else, whatever you have given is not yours anymore, so you don't pay zakat on it, okay? Quite easy to understand. 2, the one who has a debt due to a person, okay? So we're not talking about Allah, we're talking about humans, right? The one who has a debt due to a person. This is to the extent of the debt, and zakat is paid on excess, okay? If it reaches the zakat threshold, okay? So if somebody has, for example, 20,000, but 18,000 debt, that could be to one person, to various people. So this person has enough money to pay zakat, but he also has a bunch of debts, whether he plans to pay them off or not, right? Obviously, it's haram not to pay off your debts to people, but we don't care about the person's intention. He has a debt, he has to pay it. So we don't count that 18,000 in his zakat, so he'll have 2,000, and because that doesn't reach the nisab, then he doesn't have to pay zakat. If during the year debt arises that covers the full value of assets subject to zakat, so he's gone to literal zero or minus, okay, it is like they perished. So why does it say it is like they perished? Because there is a rule which says if all of your wealth perishes, and we're not talking about down to £1, we're talking about down to 0 or minus, right? The only way you can get to minus is through debt. But you literally don't even have a single pound anymore. We say that your money has perished. Obviously, you don't pay zakat, But there's another ruling which means your lunar year has reset. So whenever you become wealthy again, your lunar year starts from there. But unless that happens, your lunar year keeps on going on a cycle. So you have to try your best to remember the first time you ever became wealthy. Okay, that could be after a wedding. That could be maybe you sold, or somebody passed away and you inherited money. Try and remember that date and then figure out what the lunar date is from there. Okay, because that unless you've hit absolute zero, complete bankruptcy, your lunar year will always be on that date. It'll just be reoccurring. But if you hit absolute zero, or through debt you hit absolute zero, so you might have money, so on the outside you might still look rich, right? But you owe so much money to people that if you were to try and pay it all off, you would hit zero, right? So debt arises that covers the full value of assets, and the same applies to the debt that takes one's wealth below the zakat threshold. Okay, so maybe you haven't hit absolute zero, but if you go below below whatever the threshold is, 80 grams of gold, then you don't pay zakat on that, but your lunar year doesn't reset. So your lunar year doesn't reset if you don't hit zero. Number 4, clothing that one is in need of. Okay, household furniture, places of residence. It says places, yeah, of residence. Books. There is no zakat on books, even if they do not belong to those for whom they are suitable when trade is not intended. Unless you bought the books with the intention of selling them, you don't have to pay zakat on them, even if you're not an alim or a scholar or whatever. Those for whom the books are suitable may take zakat. Okay, so the only difference is if you are a scholar, or if those books are to do with your profession. You might be a doctor, and obviously a doctor is a scholar in their own field. A scholar is not just an Islamic scholar, yeah? So a doctor, they'll have books about, you know, health and doctor books and whatnot. An engineer will have books on engineering. So we're not talking about those books. We're talking about Romeo, Juliet, Sherlock Holmes, all these other books, or books which are outside your profession. For example, if I got a book about dietary things, or nutrition, or whatnot, or health and medicine, because I'm not a doctor, that's not my field, okay, I won't pay zakat on them. However, I will calculate them towards my nisab, and I might not be eligible to accept zakat because of those books. So those for whom the books are suitable may take zakat if the value of the books equals several zakat thresholds. So even though I might have £1 million worth of books, because they're all to do with my profession, I can still accept zakat, right? Obviously, if I'm poor, right? If I'm poor, but I have £1 million worth of books. However, if they're not to do with my profession, then I'm not able to take zakat, even though I don't have to give it. However, one may not take zakat if the books are not required for studying or reference, or one has more than a single copy. That's also important. You don't need 5 copies of the same book. So a question says, I've heard the opinion that due to the rising price of gold, the standard used is now silver rather than gold. Would that be enforceable, i.e. you are sinful if you stick with the gold nisab value? Now, I might be completely wrong here. I'm not a business expert or anything. But if the price of gold is rising, I would interpret that as the other assets falling in price, not the price of gold itself rising. For example, if 1 gram of gold goes from being £10 to being £20, I wouldn't say that gold got more expensive. I would say that the fiat pound has devalued. Because normally gold is used as a standard. But nowadays, I don't know if they're playing games again, because these countries can buy huge amounts of gold and sell huge amounts of gold and whatnot. But I wouldn't really, if I have gold, I would definitely be calculating it according to the grams, which is what you have to do. If I have fiat money, I would be looking at whichever one is going to be lower. So whichever one is going to force me to pay more, or whichever one is going to make me pay zakat. For example, if I were to calculate it to gold, and gold would say, you haven't reached nisab, then silver, I would look at silver. If silver says that I have reached nisab and I have to pay zakat, then you'd go according to that. Yeah, so the nisab value, yeah. You would go according to whichever one is the lower value. The scholar of sacred law does not become rich due to his books that he needs, except for the purposes of debt owed to people whereby they are liquidated. So the scholar of sacred law does not become rich due to his books that he needs, except for the purposes of debts owed to people whereby they are liquidated. So he doesn't have to pay zakat on it, right? Sorry, he doesn't reach nisab. However, in a court case, if he owes somebody money, he has to sell his books. So he can be forced to liquidate his books. However, he does not reach the nisab value through his books. The books are liquidated by a court order and debt repaid. Now, tools used in one's profession, unless it leaves a trace of its body on the object. This is interesting. So tools which you use in your profession, this is regardless of whether the tool is a consumable or non-consumable product. Okay. Now, tools you don't pay zakat on. However, unless it leaves a trace of its body on the object. Okay. For example, silicone, or for example, you're a shoe shiner and you put dyes and that black stuff on people's shoes, for example, like galnut used in tanning. These are subject to zakat if a year passes over them and they reach the zakat threshold. Okay, so they also, you pay zakat on these things. In contrast, there is no zakat on that which does not remain, like soap, and it equals multiple zakat thresholds. Okay, so if it's something like soap where you use it and you wash it away or it disappears, so you're not leaving it on whatever you're doing, right? There's no zakat on that, even if it reaches multiple thresholds, even if a year passes over it. And okay, as long as he hasn't intended to sell it, he's not planning to sell it. Okay, so why is this important? Because we say if it leaves a piece of it on the person or on whatever you're working on, then we say that you're actually selling the product. But anything that doesn't leave a trace, we're saying that you're selling a service. That's the difference. The difference between a service and a product is whether the product stays with the person. So if I'm shining your shoes, right, the dye that I use or whatever it's called, the coloring that I use, because it stays on your shoes, right, the product stays on your shoes, I have to calculate the zakat of those products because I'm actually selling you the product, because the product is staying with you once I'm done. So I can't say that was my service. But my brush, for example, whatever I'm putting your foot on, it could be a stool, it could be something else. I don't have to count that because that doesn't leave any mark on your shoe, or that doesn't leave a piece of itself, a trace of itself on you. Number 9, lost wealth that is found after years, and that which fell in the sea and was recovered after years. What does that mean? You have to do back payments. So you have to pay back everything that you owed from previous zakats. So if you lost money, right, and this can happen, you misplaced it, you can't find it anywhere, your zakat day has come, You're looking for this money. You remember you put it in an envelope somewhere, but you can't find it anywhere. Because it's lost and it's irrecoverable. So it can't just be like lost in the house. It needs to be absolutely like you've looked everywhere and you have given up all hope of finding this money. Then you can pretend like that money doesn't exist and you calculate your zakat that way. However, if you do end up finding it, then you need to calculate your past zakats with that. So that is if someone lost something and lost hope in regaining it, but later found it. There is no zakat for the period. Sorry, there is no zakat for the period in which the item was like. Sorry, yeah, what I said is the opposite. There is no zakat for the period in which the item was lost, as long as you have the condition of you've completely lost any hope of regaining it. So there's no zakat for the previous ones, but obviously for future, you've found that wealth. Now, that which has been usurped and there is no proof against the usurper. So if something has been stolen from you and you're unable to prove, so even though Allah knows, you're unable to prove to anybody that they stole it from you. The reason we say you're unable to prove it, because if you are able to prove it, then there is a hope that you will get it back. So you have to pay zakat on it. It's likely that you're going to get it back. But if you've got no proof, then it's unlikely that you're ever going to get that back. Obviously, unless the person does tawbah and repents and gives it back to you. But you lose hope there. That which is buried in open country and one forgot its location and then remembers it, there's no zakat for that, yeah? On the previous years. Similarly, zakat is not mandatory upon goods deposited with someone who is not acquaintance of the owner. Similarly, zakat is not mandatory upon goods deposited with someone who is not an acquaintance of the owner and the owner forgets about it. Okay, so let's say you gave your money to somebody and you're not friends with them, and then you completely forgot about it. So this person is unlikely to give you your stuff back. If it is an acquaintance, zakat is mandatory, as it is upon goods buried in zakat is mandatory, as it is mandatory upon goods buried in a fortified place like one's own home or another's house. Okay, so if it's lost in your house somewhere, you have to pay zakat on it because you will find it eventually. The scholars differ over that which is buried in an orchard or private land. Why? Because orchard would be bigger, right? Or if it's just private land. Debt, so you don't pay zakat on debt where the debtor has denied liability for years and the creditor has no evidence. So you lent somebody money and for years they are saying that they don't owe you money and you have no evidence to prove that they owe you money. You don't have to pay zakat on that money anymore, because you lose hope in regaining it. Thereafter, evidence emerges by the debtor acknowledging the debt in front of people after many years. Okay, but if you do catch the guy admitting his fault, then you don't have to pay zakat on the previous years, but obviously you will pay zakat in the future because you will get your money back. Or you have proof now to get your money back. So you will start paying your zakat on it. So this, so number 12 here, number 11 here, number 10, number 9. So from 9 to 12, this is all based off of one rule. What's that rule? If your wealth, you've completely lost hope in regaining it, then you don't pay zakat on it. Even if you regain it afterwards, you don't pay zakat on the lost years. So that's what the rule is. Number 13, wealth confiscated oppressively, again, according to the same rule, yeah? wealth confiscated oppressively, then one attains it after many years. Again, you don't pay zakat on the past years. So what's the difference between usurping and oppressive? Oppressively means to command someone to pass it over against his will. So you're being told to hand it over. Okay. Usurping means they've forcefully taken it from you. So usurping is even worse. Yeah. Oppressive means, for example, maybe this could be a husband, it could be somebody in the family, it could be somebody outside of the family which has control over you. They might tell you to give them your money, right? And obviously they're not forcefully taking it out your hand, but it's oppressive. They might be strong. You might fear that they're going to either hurt you or they're going to fire you or something's going to happen, or it could be blackmailed, right? So this is oppressive. So you hand over your money, but because it's oppressive, we still say you don't pay zakat on it, yeah? Usurping is to forcefully take it from you, like pickpocketing or physically taking it from you. If the debtor acknowledges the debt and he is someone who is able to pay, okay, so if the person who has taken your money, as in you've lent them money and so they're in debt to you, if that person says that yes, I do owe you money, and he is someone who is able to pay, so he's working, he's got an income, so, or he's unable to pay, so either he's able to pay or not, or he is bankrupt, or he's completely bankrupt, it doesn't matter, okay? So he could be someone who can pay or not pay or bankrupt. And thereafter, the creditor gains ownership, so you finally got your money back. It is incumbent upon him to pay zakat on that which has passed. Okay, you have to pay zakat on the past years. Why? Because the person never denied the debt. He always acknowledged it. It doesn't matter if he was bankrupt, as long as he kept acknowledging your debt, he kept saying, yes, I owe you money. It doesn't matter if he's able to pay, unable to pay, or bankrupt. If he acknowledges the debt, whenever you get your money back, you have to pay the previous years. Now, we're going to talk about debts here. There are three types of debts. Know that debts are of three types according to Imam Abu Hanifa. There are three types of debts. One is a strong debt, medial and weak. So strong, medium, weak. Zakat is mandatory when the amount of debt itself reaches the zakat threshold and a lunar year passes over it. Okay? So, zakat is mandatory when the amount of the debt itself, which is debt that you are going to receive from the person. So you've given it to somebody, not that you owe somebody, right? We're talking about the person who has lent the money, yeah? We're not talking about a person who has borrowed money. A person who's borrowed money doesn't pay zakat on the money he's borrowed. We're talking about the person who has lended somebody else money. If that money that you've lent somebody else reaches the nisab, reaches the threshold, you still have to pay zakat on it. Okay, even though it's not in, you don't have it in your hand, you've given it to them. So zakat is mandatory when the amount of the debt itself reaches the zakat threshold and a lunar year passes over it. Okay, just like normal money. For strong and medial debt, okay, for strong and medial debt, zakat is mandatory, but not immediately when a year passes, okay? So you pay it once you get it, even if it is before he takes possession of the loaned amount, okay? So however many years have passed, as long as it's a strong or a medial debt, you have to pay it all those past years. For weak debt, zakat becomes mandatory, but not immediately after taking possession, okay? So you don't pay it on the past years. For weak debt, zakat is not you don't pay it until you've received the whole thing. For weak debt, so it's going to explain it here. The weak debt, zakat is not mandatory until the creditor receives 200 dirhams and the year passes over them. okay, whilst they are in his possession. So you've gotten at least 200 dirhams back and a whole year has passed over it. This is because weak debt is essentially considered non-existent before it is received. So weak debt, we count it as if it's just not there. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, we don't even count it in calculations. Accordingly, assuming that the person has no other money, because if you have money, what would happen? Your lunar year would already be going, right? The zakat threshold is not fulfilled until 200 dirhams are received and then a year passes, okay? This is in contrast to strong debt, where the person is considered to own the debt even before any money is received. So he's just, let's say he's raking up zakat debts for, because it's a strong debt. Could you explain 1.6 again? Hold on. So yeah, this 28, that was explaining 1.6. So it's saying that debts are either strong, medial, or weak. We'll get to, it's going to explain what those mean. If it's strong and medial, you have to pay zakat when you get the money, but also on the years which have passed, because we count it as it's in your possession, the strong one, yeah? But if it's a weak debt, we basically pretend the money doesn't exist. You don't owe zakat on it. If you receive it and a year passes over it, then you, just like any other money you receive, we count it as just new money that has come into your bank account, and you would calculate the zakat after a year. So number 28 here explains it quite nicely. It is incumbent to pay strong debt, a loan and consideration for trading chattel, when the creditor takes possession of the loaned amount. Every time he receives 40 dirhams, it is incumbent to pay 1 dirham. So, if the debt is a strong debt, you have to pay it, okay? When the creditor takes possession, so not before. So the loan will, every time you get 40 dirhams, you have to pay 1 dirham in zakat. This is because, according to Abu Hanifa, no zakat is payable on an amount less than 40 dirhams. So if you get 39 dirhams, okay, you're unable to pay zakat on it. So we pretend like it's 0. It doesn't matter. It's either 0 or 39. But if it's 40, then you pay 1 dirham, because you always pay 1/40th of your wealth. A fifth of the zakat threshold for silver. So 40 dirhams is 1/5 of the zakat threshold for silver, which is 200 dirhams. Yeah. So 1/5 of 200 is 40. And for strong debt, the year starts from the point one first acquired the wealth that was used in the transaction to create the debt, not from the point of the transaction itself or when the consideration was received. Okay. Each time the creditor acquires 40 dirhams, he pays the zakat in respect of years that have passed. For example, at the end of her first lunar year, at the end of her first lunar zakat year, Aisha has 10,000 of cash, upon which she pays 250 zakat. During year 2, okay, so she's got 10,000, 2.5% is 250, okay. But year 2, during year 2, so year 2 hasn't finished. During year 2, she lends Hind 4,000. So how much does Aisha have? 6,000 now. She's given 4,000 to Hind. And at the end of her second lunar zakat year, she has 8,000 of cash plus a loan payable by Hind, which was 4,000 of 4,000. Yeah. So she's got 8,000 in the bank and 4,000 Hind owes her. She therefore pays 200 zakat. Why? On the cash, on the 8,000, she pays 200. 2.5% of 8,000, 200. Okay, because that's what she has in the bank. Yeah. But as for the loan, but what about the 4,000 that she's given to Hind? This is a strong debt. And although £100 zakat becomes mandatory, she has to pay it, but not immediately, right? So it is payable when Hind repays the loan. If Hind repays the loan in year 4, so year 2 has ended, year 3 has passed, year 4 has passed, £100 zakat is paid in respect of year 2, and 97.50 for year 3. In year 4, Aisha pays total zakat of 292.57. So year 2 was 100, year 3 was 97.50, and year 4 was 95.07. Okay, it is worth noting that Aisha may pay zakat. Yes, it is worth noting that Aisha may pay zakat on the loan at the end of year 2 and 3 to avoid accumulating a large lump sum payment in the year in which the loan repayment occurs. Obviously, so it's saying she doesn't have to pay it immediately. But if she does pay it immediately, it'll be nicer, because at least she wouldn't have to go through all of these calculations whenever she gets the money back, and then has to pay a huge sum of zakat. So what strong debt does is it accumulates as a zakat, but you only pay it once you get the money back. So someone's asking, how would that work with deferred meher, money given over a number of years? Would the wife have to pay zakat on the whole meher amount, or just the amount received for that year? I'm not sure. To me, that sounds like it could be strong debt, because the husband is acknowledging the debt and saying he's going to pay it. However, she never had that money in the beginning to give, so I'm going to say I don't know. Maybe we'll most likely see it in this book, inshallah. So what did we say? It's incumbent to pay the strong debt when the creditor takes possession of the loaned amount. Every time he receives 40 dirhams, it is incumbent to pay 1 dirham. Now, it has been made clear by my liege lord and father that mursad wealth is a loan, even if it is repaid by deducting it from rental payments on the building, and it is mandatory to pay zakat for years that have passed when the leasee gains possession of the money. So mursad is, you're leasing a shop or land, right? You're leasing, so you don't own the land, but what you're doing is you make an agreement with the landlord and you say, listen, I'm going to invest in this land, even though it's not my land, it's your land. I'm going to invest £10,000 in this land, and the way I want my money paid back to me, because it's your land I'm investing in. I want my 10,000 paid back to me. Okay, this is called mursad. And most of the time, the way the landlord will pay this money off will be by deducting it from the rent. Okay, so it's saying that Ibn Abidin says that mursad wealth is a loan. So even though I'm investing in the land, because it's not my land, and I have an agreement with the landlord that he's going to pay me back for it, we count that as a loan, even if it is paid by deductible from rental payments on the building. Okay, so even if the agreement is a deduction of the rent, and it is mandatory to pay zakat for years that have passed when the leasee gains possession of the money. Okay, so whenever I get that 10,000 back, or whenever something is deducted from my rental payments, because that's also getting the money back, according to the quantity received, I have to pay the zakat. Now, zakat is paid upon taking possession of 200 dirhams. Zakat is paid upon taking possession of 200 dirhams relating to medial debt. Okay, so we said strong debt, it'll accrue zakat debt for you. Okay, so you'll have to make up the payments that passed on the years of the strong debt. We've only got a couple minutes. Yeah, we can finish. We should be able to finish off. So that was strong debt. What about medial debt? That is when payment is received in exchange for non-trading chattel. For example, the price of a house servant or the like of what is engaged in the fulfillment of basic needs such as food, drink, property, and so on. Okay, so medial debt is what is owed, right? That is when payment is received in exchange for non-trading chattel, right? So for services, for example, the price of a house servant. Okay, so you bought a servant. Let's not say you bought a servant, but you bought a servant. So this is a normal non-trading chattel, or the like of what is engaged in the fulfillment of basic needs such as food, drink, property, and so on. So if one inherits or is bequeathed right to a loan payable by a person, okay, it is like medial debt. So let's say somebody owed your dad money, and let's not say you. Let's say somebody's dad was owed money, and the dad passed away. So that person owes the money to who now? The son, right? This debt is medial. Okay, so the son, when he's going to pay his zakat, he counts this debt as medial debt. And the part of the year that passed before the creditor gains possession of the debt is not reckoned. So let's go down and explain that. Now, for strong debt, the year starts from when one first acquired the wealth that was used in the transaction to create the debt, not from the point of the transaction itself, or when the consideration was received. Okay, so whenever you got that money, that's the time your year starts. In contrast, for medial debt, the start point is differed upon. Some deemed it to be from the point of the transaction, whilst others said it is from the point consideration is received by the creditor. Our text above has adopted the latter position, being the consideration is received by the creditor. Okay, so strong debt, the year of that starts whenever you get the money, not when you loan it out to somebody else. Whenever you've gotten the money, okay, as in you own the money, the year starts then. And then you loaned that money to somebody else, it just carries on. Okay, but for medial debt, it's saying that the start point of the lunar year is differed upon. It's not when you first got the money, but it's when the transaction either is made, according to one, or it's when the point of consideration is received by the creditor. So when the person basically accepts it. So that is medial debt. So until you gain possession of that money back, you don't count that in the year. So what does it say? The part of the year that passed before the creditor gains possession of the debt is not reckoned. Okay, so we're talking about, we're not looking at the time here of when your father lent that money. We're looking at the father passes away. Now this person owes you money. Once you accept that and you say, yes, okay, you owe me however many pounds you owed my dad. Once you have accepted that, that is when the year starts. Now, for weak debt, which is consideration for what is not deemed wealth, such as dowry. There you go. So that's a weak debt. Okay. Indemnity for bodily injury or a marriage annulment payment from the wife. Zakat is payable when the creditor gains possession of 200 dirhams. So until you reach nisab, you don't have to pay it. So until you get that money and it reaches nisab, you don't have to pay zakat on it. So that's the answer. And 1 year passes after possession. Okay. So the dowry, the mehr, obviously for the woman, not the man, because he will take that off as a debt. The woman will pay the zakat of her meher once she gets it, because it's a weak debt. There's a chance that the guy doesn't pay it. The condition for 1 year passing after possession is not applicable if he owns that which is added to weak, strong, or medial debt. This is like profit that is added to the same genus of other assets. So when we say a year has to pass, we say that in case he wasn't rich before then. But if he was already rich before then and he's already got a lunar year, a lunar date, then whenever he gets that money back, he doesn't have to wait a separate year. He just adds it to that lunar date. So if he has to pay it in a month, he has to pay it in a month. Inshallah, that makes sense. So the person, he already has a lunar date. He's already a wealthy person. So whenever he gets these payments back, so you've loaned that money to somebody, he's paid you that money back. We said in the book you have to wait a year. But that's only if you weren't rich beforehand. If you are rich beforehand and you've got a date as a zakat date, then we just go according to that date. So it's as if you've just gained a bit more wealth during your zakat year. Nothing's changed according in respect to the date. However, if you don't have a date, right? So you don't have nisab, and then you received money that somebody owed you, and then you reach nisab, that's when you wait a year. Inshallah. Okay, so next lesson we'll do conditions for the obligatoriness of zakat. So zakat does get a bit confusing. Even I get confused myself, as you saw during this lesson. That's why with zakat it's always important to refer back to the book. You keep referring back to the book, because anything to do with money, transactions and things, that's when the stuff gets really confusing, and you just want to always refer back to the book. Obviously, anybody else, normal people, you will always refer to a scholar, an imam. They'll sit down, they'll read the book, and they'll calculate your zakat for you. This is really important. As we've just read, even with debt, there's like 3 different types of debt. There's strong, medium, weak. There's different dates. There's a whole waiting of a year. There's a nisab. There's you might owe money, but you might have also loaned somebody money. So these calculations can very quickly become confusing. What we like to do is we always say, just calculate the maximum and give it. That way, you're paying off your zakat, and any amount that you paid extra is going to be sadaqah, right? So you want to pay just the maximum amount, because you never know, you might owe you might owe a bit more zakat than you thought you owed, right? So you always calculate the maximum, add a bit on top, because it's only 2.5%. The only time it's going to make a really big dent in somebody's wallet, and it's not going to make a dent in a rich person's wallet, but any time that we can say, oh, this zakat is a high amount, is when the person's super rich. So if we think that 2.5% of his wealth is a lot of wealth, then that person is very, very rich. And for them to pay a bit more extra isn't a problem. So instead of just figuring out how much you know, always just pay extra in zakat. We always say that. Why? Because the calculations can get very difficult. For example, a shop owner has to calculate all of his stock, right? So he'll sit there, he'll count, for example, let's say he's a corner shop, he'll sit there and he'll literally count all of the chocolates, he'll count all of the crisps, all of the drinks at the price he's selling them at, and then he'll note that down as his zakat. But what if a chocolate bar fell down behind the shelf? It's still his, he's still planning to sell it. It's not lost beyond any hope, right? So if he were to calculate his zakat to the penny, and only pay that, and then he found out a chocolate was behind the shelf, or he never found out at all, he's gonna have to deal with that now. So we always just say pay extra. There's always going to be a couple of pounds in a pocket in a jacket somewhere. You're always going to have some money lying around that you haven't taken account of, right? So you always just pay a bit extra, and you make sure that you're safe from anything that you have to pay zakat on. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. الفاتحة مع الصلوات.